First of all, I'd like to thank Jeff for putting on Real Roble. This has been really great, and it's really been nice hearing everybody who has spoken, and I'm looking forward to everybody who is going to speak. So, thank you, Jeff. As Jeff said, my name is Connor. I live in 1A, and I'm a sophomore physics major, and I'm going to be talking to you guys today about the philosophy of physics. So, I feel like a lot of people don't really think about the implications of physics, not in their practical implications, but more about the implications in, now that we have this structure of physics, should we trust it? Is it going to be meaningful? And is it going to be self-consistent? So I'm going to be exploring that today. The philosophy of physics as a discipline itself is too big to talk about in 5 minutes, clearly. So I'm just going to do a case study about scientific realism. But before we go into that, we need to have a few definitions, which is what is scientific realism and what is scientific anti-realism. So scientific realism is this belief that all the theories and all the equations that physicists get have some sort of underlying connection to the deep, reality. Some sort of deep reality. You could almost think of it as like a Platonic form reality, or Kantian's noumenal world reality. They have something to, they're describing some real thing out there. It's not observable to us, but it is some sort of concrete, principle that's out there. And then you have the anti-realists, who are saying, you can't be that bold to say that there's something out there that we're getting to. All the scientific theories and all the equations that we've made are merely just nice, kind of almost just a nice way to organize all the data. You have all this data and you want to say, okay, how's some way that we can describe it in some meaningful way so that when we have new data, we can fit that in and that we can make extrapolations. So you have the realists, they want to have some connection to some underlying reality or some underlying untouchable reality. And you have the anti-realists who say, no, it's just a way to organize all the data. Cool. So there are two arguments that each make on each other's, to refute each other's argument. And the first one is called the no miracles argument. And it's made, it's a favorite one of the realists. And it goes something like this. It's that, well, we had a explanation of it pretty recently, last week, when LIGO detected gravitational waves, which was it was in the equations of general relativity that Einstein made 100 years ago. And the realists would look at that and say, okay, Einstein didn't have the capacity to observe gravitational waves. We only had that capacity about 10 years ago. But still, by looking at all of the equations, he was able to codify them in such a way, kind of to get a sense of that underlying space-time structure, that 100 years from his discovery, or his formulation, we then had the capability of detecting those gravitational waves, which to them would be no miracle. Because it's he had this underlying, he was in sync with the true reality. And so it was just a matter of time until we actually were able to observe those. So that's the no miracles argument. The counter to that would be what the anti-realists would make, which is called pessimistic meta-induction. I honestly don't know why they call it. It's just, philosophers like to use big words. Whatever. Pessimistic meta-induction is the anti-realist saying, let's take the case of relativistic mechanics and Newtonian mechanics. Or, Newtonian mechanics first and then relativistic mechanics chronologically. Newton came along and he said, okay, I'm going to think of space and time as static or flowing neatly, and I'm going to create this structure to make predictions. And Einstein came along and changed that look. Well, pretty big, but he changed it. But what you notice in limiting cases, when the velocity is not near the speed of light, they make the same predictions, right? You're able to fit the data in exactly the same way to error bars. So, when you're just dealing with, pool tables on a ball, if you use relativistic mechanics and if you use Newtonian mechanics, you're going to get the same answer. So, observationally, they make no difference. But at the core of them, there's a completely different structure to them. Newton thought that space and time were kind of just static, given to us, God-given, the watchmaker made this universe, and it was pretty static. Whereas Einstein came in and he said, stuff like mass is totally different than Newton. You can't have simultaneity, and the whole nature of space and time changes as you interact with it. And so if you think about that in a realist mind frame, you're saying that from going from Newtonian mechanics to relativistic mechanics, you're in a sense changing the entire underlying structure of what mass means, of what simultaneity means. And so the anti-realist would say, well, then it's impossible for you to really get at some true nature. Because if you look back at the history of science, that's all you see. You see, okay, this theory was given for a while, and then you had an overturn, and then a little bit, and then an overturn. So if you kind of just make an inductive argument, you'd expect more overturns to occur. So we'd never be able to claim that, okay, now we have it. Now we have what the true nature of reality is. We only, maybe as the anti-realist would say, this is only a convenient way to organize the data. I have no real conclusion to make about that one, whether it's whether you should choose one or the other. But I'd argue that, when you're taking a physics class, there's always a nature, or there's always a tendency to just kind of get through it, and you just look at the equations just for what they are and try to just memorize them or something like that. But there's a whole new aspect that you can get out of a physics class if you think about, okay, this is a way to structure the observations around us and the reality around us. But is this an effective way? And what should we take from this, and what are its implications for furthering physics? Is this a good way to codify everything? What should we what should we take from the physical laws? And do they have any basis for how we want to interact with the world? Thank you.